Yeah, so thanks for joining. Today, we're going to talk about several different applications of AI and its use for different kinds of things. We have a Google Doc all set up, and we're going to try to go through it step by step. This conversation should take about an hour. So to begin with, A, thanks for coming on, and B, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing recently and the details of that?
Sure. So I've been doing mostly technical AI safety research focused on alignment. And the main themes over the last year and a half been truthful AI. So basically, how to build more truthful systems and how to measure how truthful a system is. So focusing on factual accuracy and then also thinking about honesty. So can we get, say, language models be honest in the sense of if they have a particular belief, then they'll tell you about that belief. And so maybe their belief is false, but you want it to be the case that they will tell you that belief regardless. And so those are like the broad areas. And then, uh, yeah, been recently thinking also about a different topic, I guess, which is just evaluating AI capabilities that may be relevant to the risk from AI. So thinking about deception, one of those. And so, yeah, I think there are like two kind of valuable things that I'm thinking about as like long-term goals. One is making systems more aligned and developing techniques for that. And the other is just being able to measure more accurately whether systems have dangerous capabilities and trying to have better models of how those are scaling.
So your work on Truthful AI, I remember you wrote that paper with a few other people a few years back, and it seems like some of those ideas have been incorporated by OpenAI. Is that true yet? Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much we're responsible for this.
sure,
And
yeah.
on one paper that I was on Truthful QA, which is a benchmark for evaluating the truthfulness of models on a particular kind of question, the questions that humans might give false answers to. So that was a collaboration with Jacob Hilton, who's at OpenAI. And yeah, he was basically spearheading some efforts within OpenAI to think about truthfulness and work on building more truthful models. It's at least that's work has been like some part of the picture there at OpenAI. And then I've also like talk to people at DeepMind and Anthropic as well, who are also like pretty interested in this. I mean, I think in the last, in the last few months, maybe like the whole world has got to some extent interested with
Yeah.
ChatGPT in language models hallucinating, saying false things, and the difficulty of distinguishing between like when the models are very fluent, it becomes more difficult to tell because superficially what they've said might sound reasonable. Yeah.
How do you feel like the Truthful agenda is going? Is it being continued? Like, are other people trying to continue a lot of the issues? It seems like a really hard thing to A, define what truth even means, right? And then B, to really flesh it out.
Yeah, I think, yeah, in a paper that I wrote with Owen Cotton Barrett and other collaborators, we thought a lot about how to define truthfulness in a useful way for AI systems, and and then sort of thought about some practical issues of how would you actually evaluate it, even if you had a good definition. So how would you tell that an AI was being truthful, and how could you like train AIs to be more truthful? I think there definitely has been a lot of interest in that. There's been a lot of improvement. So OpenAI's latest model, like ChatGPT, is much better on, I think, in terms of truthfulness than the original GPT-3. So there've been like big improvements. The same with Anthropic's model Claude. It seems to be significantly better. So better at avoiding hallucination and just saying random things, better at not mimicking human misconceptions, superstitions and things like that, or like commonly misquoted statements. So yeah, I think there've been significant improvements. I think there does seem to be less by way of people really thinking about the definition, how to define truthfulness. Yeah, what makes sense as a sort of more precise definition in this kind of case. And there's still like relatively few benchmarks for measuring how truthful a model is in a way that is like a public benchmark where you can say everyone understands that benchmark. They know, okay, DeepMind got this score, Anthropic got this score. Groups would compete to have better scores. I think that hasn't really happened. Or like we have a benchmark, people do use that, and so that's like one way to compare. But that's a relatively narrow sort of slice of possible questions. So there's a whole space of like other things you could ask language models. You want truthful answers, and currently I don't think there are very good ways to benchmark to like know how good a model is at that.
Wait, sorry. Well, you could understand that truth is difficult to benchmark, and I could also understand that there are a lot of other things that are important to benchmark besides truth.
Mm-hmm.
Can you rephrase that last bit? Or I guess like another question is like 5 years from now, what would a good positive picture be like where we have the benchmarks that we need on the things that we need it for?
Yeah, I mean, the benchmarks are sort of a means to an end. So
Yeah.
if the models were just, yeah, I guess it gets difficult over time because the models will be able to answer questions that we as humans, even human experts, would find it hard to evaluate whether whether the model's answer was true.
Yeah.
Because the model would be just saying more sophisticated things about technical topics. And so it might be like a big project for us to even decide whether it was true. I think if we're in the realm where, human experts are in a position to just read what the model says and say, yeah, that's a accurate answer or that's not. I think it probably is important to have benchmarks. So you can have a system that just doesn't make obvious mistakes. So like you could fire up the system, ask it like a set of questions, read the questions people are putting online and just see like it's just extremely reliable. It's like comparable to sort of the most reliable humans at an intuitive level just by, reading a bunch of answers from it. But then, yeah, if you wanted a more precise quantitative measure for this, that where it was asked a really wide range of questions like medicine, law, hard sciences, social science, just like basically, very specific facts, like, the kind of things that Google Maps knows, right? Like, is there a church on this street? Like, what's the distance between these two streets or towns? So yeah, something that was like tested rigorously on those and just, you could then show that it really reliably avoids like hallucinations or falsehoods and that, you have whole spaces that are difficult to evaluate. So yeah, if I ask for a sort of layman summary of quantum mechanics, it's just difficult to judge, whether the model was, as accurate as it could have been, given that it has to give a summary in layman's terms. But you can still imagine like some summaries would obviously be false, would be like clearly inaccurate. And so, yeah, so that takes, a bit more subtlety to measure, but you can imagine again, it like doing a job comparable to a human who's like really good at this kind of thing, really epistemically reliable.
So in forecasting, there is a difference between like calibration and resolution.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I guess there's a difference of like how much knowledge is being shared, and then of that knowledge, like how much of it is accurate. So one question about truth is like, are you caring more about calibration, so to speak, where we care more about the fact that like as long as a model knows what it doesn't know, then it's just not going to reveal that information that's a lie, or it's not going to reveal any information that's false. But it may just reveal not much information at all, right?
Yeah. So, right, we talk about that in Truthful QA paper. Yeah, the way we define truthfulness in these works is that a model could be perfectly truthful if it just never said anything. And generally, yeah, it's one way to avoid falsehood is just to avoid statements where you have a small amount of uncertainty.
So it sounds a bit like truthfulness is kind of equivalent to just having great calibration. Like if the model always said, I'm 80% sure that this is true in cases where society is 80% sure that it's true, then that would be a true fact or a true statement.
Yeah. I mean, this is a complicated issue in terms of the definitions. So there's a lot that, we could get into on this, but I think and I'm personally excited about AI systems that give you like quantitative like probabilistic information, give you credences, much more often than humans do, because that's something that they could do automatically, cheaply,
Yeah.
like after every sentence in principle, in a way that's quite costly for humans, even if the humans are good at forecasting. So I think that is like a very interesting direction, but at the moment that would just not be accessible to the average user, even to like, I don't know, yeah, most users of language models now don't really, work in probabilities in that way, the way that forecasters do. So I think it looks like people are just going to have these kind of fairly human-like interactions with language models in which they're not going to always be like giving you a lot of epistemic hedging or epistemic information. And so in that case, like, yeah, we want them to avoid saying false things while also being informative. Like clearly informativeness is really important as well. And yeah, I guess there's like some trade-off between those two things. In our definitions, we focus on like negligent falsehoods or, basically things that are, yeah, cases where the model is saying something false and there's some like clear sense in which it could have done better. It doesn't just like say this once and then immediately correct itself. Or if the human asks for more information, you know, the model would have to double down. If it instead like retracted it, then that wouldn't count as a, you know, a very bad failure of truthfulness. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the interest of using AI for forecasting questions.
Yeah.
And for probabilities. That could be a good time transition to go more into that. So this is something that I know a few of the forecasting players have been investigating. So Metaculus has like a whole AI team right now. We've at the Quantified Uncertainty Research Institute have been doing a little bit of investigation, but not that much yet. It does seem like you could ask GPT-3 for its guesses on forecasting questions, and you could just ask multiple times to be able to like, you could average the results from like multiple queries with the same question. You could do things like, you could ask for Fermi estimates. So you could ask it to like try to break it down. And sometimes like that seems to be working. Yeah, curious if you have more thoughts on what could be done in that space.
Yeah. So I think both of those things are right. You could do some kind of ensembling within a language model where you just pose the question in different ways, get it to generate estimates or probabilities, and then average those. That would probably help a bit. And then, yeah, doing Fermi estimates. I mean, I think the current models like Claude, I tried something like this where I just asked it to break something down and then estimate, say, probabilities or weights for the components. And it can do some of that, just zero shot. So yeah, I think if you had a very large number of Fermi estimates and you fine tune a model to then produce Fermi estimates based on that, or you just put a large number of these in a prompt, I think that would probably work like reasonably well. So yeah, and then you can do this recursively. You can ask the language model. So you break the question into these different components, make estimates for those. You could do your thing where you're ensembling for each of those and then put everything together. So yeah, so I think that those would be like useful tricks. I think there's still this difficult thing of evaluating models on forecasting. And so I guess, yeah, with a bunch of collaborators, I worked on a paper last year where we created a data set for models to do forecasting. And the idea there is like, in principle, you could sort of you could train models to do forecasting based on past data, where the idea is like the model doesn't know. Say, if we take the 2016 election, you could train the model just on data up till 2016. So it doesn't know what happened in the 2016 election. And then it tries to forecast it. And you can then, update it based on what actually happened. And so the model can kind of learn forecasting from like going through past data. And so this is kind of a powerful source that you have for models that you don't have in the same way for humans, because we just know a lot of stuff that happened in the past. So we can't like pretend we don't know it. But yeah, I think this is still just quite difficult for models at the moment.
Yeah, imagine some of what you talked about and some of the possible ways, the way that GPT is typically used is with prompt engineering, or that's like a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
Do you think it'll get to the point where we'll be able to have, GPT try to guess different prompts that could be effective and then do, meta learning in that way? If the compute gets cheap enough, I assume it could kind of if we have a training set of like 1,000 estimation questions, it might be able to figure out some like just very clever prompts to, yeah.
Yeah. So is this a general thing, like models coming up with prompts as so something like, the human writes a prompt, maybe that prompt's not very good, and the model just generates a better prompt.
Or I
Is
guess
that the
like
idea?
something like reinforcement learning combined with like prompt generation. So you use like a reinforcement learning engine to come up with prompts. And then it works on a prompt until the prompt could best estimate like 1,000 different questions. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you can definitely do things like that. Yeah. There was a paper, I think, getting models to generate prompts that induce useful reasoning and showing that the language model was, I think, comparable in this paper to humans at generating those prompts. So yeah, I think I mean, definitely over time, the models have just got much more robust to, that is that they don't need such refined or like particular prompts in order to generate good outputs. So yeah, like I think with the original GPT-3, maybe you had to be quite careful in how exactly you set up the prompt, and sort of random formatting changes would lead to like much worse performance maybe. Whereas with the current models, like DaVinci 003, which is the model behind ChatGPT, like the underlying model. So that model I think is just much more robust. It doesn't need you to be such a good prompt engineer to get good results.
I guess to be a bit more specific, what I'm
Yeah.
thinking about with forecasting is that it's much more that you're describing a workflow to carry out. So the prompt, like hypothetically, the prompt could be tied to a little bit of computation or like a few steps.
Yeah.
So you could say things like, "Oh, can you try these like 10 different forecasting techniques on the same question?"
Hmm.
And then, combine all of them using this aggregation formula. Or you ask it like, "Here is this way of doing Fermi estimation. Like here are 4 examples of Fermi estimation. Can you apply this example on this thing?" So you just try it. You ask it to try very different methodologies of doing the estimation,
Hmm.
and then you just train on that, basically.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's lots of
Yeah,
ideas there. Yeah. I don't,
yeah.
I don't have things like off the top of my head, I guess.
I guess one of the big challenges with doing anything like, automating prompts is computation of actually, I like the fact that it's expensive to run this. Each query may cost more money than, yeah, I guess there's a big question of like how much costs are going to come down with that.
Hmm.
But if they do come down a whole lot, I imagine the workflows could just become a lot more powerful.
Yeah. Right.
One question that I've had for a while is there is an interesting question of like evaluation versus generation. So if it comes out that it's cheaper to evaluate text than to generate text, then as computation becomes cheaper, capabilities will improve a lot, I assume. Because you could just try out, 4,000 alternatives, evaluate each one, and then choose the best one. Do you get a sense that any of that is happening?
So you mean like high quality generation? So instead of just
Yeah.
running the really high quality model, you can just run the lower quality model and then evaluate, because evaluation is cheap, you still get a better result.
Yeah. So for
Yeah.
example, or not even that, like maybe it's just you have a high quality model, but you want a higher quality model. I think right now, even the highest quality models aren't giving us like the ideal results I would want, right?
Yeah. So I think this is true to some extent, that it's often for reasoning tasks, you might get the best results by sampling many times from your model and then using, maybe using that same model to evaluate the samples and then somehow aggregate those to produce like the final answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, the thing you said, like, I'm not sure. Yeah. So this might be a way to improve a given model. It might still be that doing like a big model is still like the sort of best model you have, the highest quality one, the one trained with the most compute might still be for lots of tasks, the best performing one if you just do one sample from it.
But I'm saying that hypothetically, like if you asked it to write an amazing essay, just say,
Hmm.
and the evaluation was good enough to realize if this essay is like a 80 out of 100,
Hmm.
and that's like the best that we could do.
Yeah.
If it were capable of doing evaluation pretty well, you could just add noise until we get to like a 90. So you just like add some randomness, and then you cut, like you evaluate the one until it gets like an 81 out of 80, 100 or something. But I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
this comes
yeah,
down to the
interesting.
question
I
of
mean,
like
I guess
how,
that
yeah,
that seems like, yeah, I think
yeah,
that it's just going to be, I think it's just going to be really expensive. So the amount of things you'd have to
yeah.
try is going to mean that, yeah. So I think you need like a reasonably smart model to do that evaluation, and then you'd need like a ton of samples
Yeah.
of these like random changes in order to get the smart model. Yeah, in order to like improve the scores significantly. I don't know. That's my intuition about that, but
So
I don't really know.
I guess a similar question would be like, do you think that a chat model is able to tell that the output that it produces is not like the best output?
Yeah, what do you mean by the best? You mean like if you then ask it this
Uh,
kind of follow up?
Yeah, if you ask it like, hey, write a 4 paragraph essay, and then at the end of that you say like, how good was that essay? Will it basically max out and assume that its outputs are like about as best as any essay that humans have produced? Or would it like realize, oh, our essay is like a 60 out of 100, and this other human one that
So
humans like a lot is like 100 out of 100?
yeah, I think it would probably say which is better, um, or like not in general, but in some cases, I think it would have maybe have non-trivial discrimination ability. Yeah, I think the models, I think the ChatGPT style models, probably can in general improve their essays by being asked. Like they write the essay, you then say like, is there anything that could be improved about this essay? They will like produce a couple of things. You then ask them to improve, to like, okay, make those edits based on what you identified, and that probably like improves the essay a little bit. That's my guess. I mean, there's like more computation being done in that case, right? So they generate the essay using a certain amount of compute, and then you're having them like read the whole essay and then like reflect on it, and then they've got basically additional computation that they can then use, right, to explain these shortcomings, and then if you ask them to generate it again, they've got, using more compute again, they're writing another draft.
I am pretty naive when it comes to some of the internal details. Do you think that reinforcement learning is getting used in like the chat GPT feedback?
So you mean the feedback that users give when they click upvote or downvote on a, or
Yeah, or
like,
even like when users, maybe they do prompt, like they change the prompt and supply, ask it to come up with another generation. Or you
right.
could
So
actually,
like
yeah,
implicitly they weren't happy with the response.
yeah,
So yeah, so they're writing in another one, and then potentially you could say, okay, we got some implicit evidence that they weren't happy with the generation,
yeah.
so we should give that a downvote in a sense, or negative vote. I imagine that they're making some use of that data. Yeah, it's a huge amount of data. It seems like it would be useful. The yeah, the reinforcement learning from human feedback that was used in part of the training of ChatGPT. So I think that is much more structured, where you have contractors who have detailed instructions for how they're meant to evaluate the answers. And so the yeah, it might be that some users of ChatGPT are like giving negative response, giving like negative feedback on things that OpenAI actually wants the model to do. So yeah, so I think the data they get from users, there's going to be like vast amounts of it, but the quality is going to be much more uneven. Yeah, and then I don't think they're like, presume they're not like updating the model like every day on all the feedback they get from users.
Sure.
So yeah, they're probably going to do some much more efficient thing than that. But yeah, I haven't thought much about that. But it does seem like it will be a useful source of information. I guess there's two things that it can improve, right? One is there's the underlying model, which is, just a large neural net. And then ChatGPT also maybe has some, programs, or there's basically some software external to the underlying neural net that maybe is doing some filtering of various kinds. And yeah, maybe they can also improve that as well using all this feedback.
Yeah, it definitely feels like to me like these applications are very much in a prototype stage. Like they're just starting, but now a whole lot of money is coming in, right? A lot more companies are getting on the bandwagon. Google might be jumping on. So, yeah, there could be a lot of development happening quickly, which would lead to things with, where the models get updated a lot more than every few weeks or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think so. Very similar models have been around for the last few years,
Yeah.
and Google Brain had some very similar models, and this thing Lambda that they were testing internally, which was a chatbot as well, and DeepMind has their own models that they've been using internally and in papers. So yeah, but I think the big difference is having an actual product that's now maybe has millions of users. So there hasn't been. I think this is the case. Yeah, I think at least ChatGPT is the first of like this quality of underlying model that has had this consumer facing version. So yeah, I think that is a difference, and there'll probably be a lot of iteration with the software. I think it's also really the first bit of like consumer software that OpenAI has put out.
Dolly is probably like, I don't know if you could classify that as consumer-ish.
Yeah, yeah. No,
But
that's
yeah,
probably true. Yeah, but it's just this year basically that they've been
yeah.
putting out software. So yeah, I think there'll probably be lots of iteration. There are already some there are various sites and apps that are using the underlying model in some capacity already. So there's already some iteration there. But yeah, no, I definitely would expect that as well as in improving the underlying models, there'll be a lot of efforts in the next just 6 months. Probably just the ChatGPT kind of overlay interface will become better in various ways.
So on Aught, so you've been part of Aught for a while in different forms, and yeah, do you want to just like give a small spiel about what Aught's been doing and like what its current strategy is?
Sure. Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah.
So so I'm on the board of directors at Aught, and so definitely not like involved day to day, but following their work, and yeah, generally I'm excited by the progress they've been making. I think there's sort of two main things that I want to highlight. So one is Elicit, which some people might have seen. Elicit.org is the website, and this is a tool that actually uses the GPT 3.5 models, the models that are underlying ChatGPT, to basically help people do reviews of the scientific literature and generally to like help you access useful information from the scientific literature. So I really recommend people just try this because I think it's much easier to get a feel for what it does that way. And this is a bit different from ChatGPT in that it won't just generate an answer. So ChatGPT will generate an answer without reference to any like citations or like pulling information from the internet. Just generates an answer based on what is met, like it has learned and stored in its weights. Whereas Elicit has a large database of scientific papers, and it is using language models to basically extract like semantic information from those papers that are relevant to the user's queries. So so that's Elicit. And then the other part of what Auth does, I mean, these things are quite integrated, but Auth is also working on research on, I'd say, a general approach to AI alignment of process-based rather than outcome-based systems. So there's a paper on this that came out recently, which I recommend. And the general idea is you could either have either train machine learning systems just based on looking at given a problem, does the machine learning system produce the right kind of outputs? And you aren't concerned with how it produced them or what the internal process is. You just basically train it to produce the right kind of outputs. And so you generally get opaque systems when you do that. And the alternative thing is to try and work out a decomposition of the system of the problem, so that you take a hard problem, you break it down into smaller subproblems, and then solve those, and then put together the solutions to solve the hard problem. And so if you can get machine learning systems to solve problems in that way, then the whole process is transparent and understandable. The reasoning is basically being made explicit rather than happening in a large neural net. So yeah, there's a recent paper from which lays out some of this at the high level, but then also looks at some actual applications of this using GPT 3.5 for practical problems in like understanding the text of scientific papers and asking like being able to answer like precise questions about those papers in a reliable way.
I imagine that almost anyone would prefer to have a process-based system the way that you describe it. Like, oh, not many people would say we're proud of our system being opaque and like hard to understand. The big question is like, what's the trade-off between like performance and introspectability or something like that? And then that would come to the obvious question, which is like, what do we think that trade-off is going to look like in the next like 10 years or so? Do you think that there are some ways to be able to have more process-based systems without that much of a loss in performance? Or maybe the performance could even be improved by doing it this way.
Yeah, I think you want to aim to be competitive with the outcome-based systems. So that's definitely the ideal. So you don't want it to be a huge overhead or process-based ways of doing things. So yeah, I think at the moment, although people do want, although, yeah, everyone would like their systems to be more transparent and easier. Like all things being equal, you'd say, I want it to be transparent so that we can like debug it and we can explain why it's robust and so on. But I think the if you're not concerned about like long-term AI safety at all, then you might say, there are various applications where if the system is just doing pretty well, if it's like pretty reliable in practice, maybe you just don't care that much how it's doing tasks. And I guess there's probably like one of these switchover uh, or like thresholds where if the system sort of clearly is like below human level, and so the it, maybe it just doesn't matter that much if you don't understand its internals, because it's at least not a danger that it's not a danger to humanity in the sense of like an agentic system would start acting on its own goals rather than your goals. So yeah, I think this is probably something that becomes more important. There's an argument for it in terms of just like robustness and good to understand systems so they don't break laws or something, or like fail uh, in a way that makes you seem negligent. But yeah, it seems to me it probably does become more important as we're entrusting like more important decisions to systems, or those systems would have the ability to like act against human goals.
My impression is that there whole many of the primary financial applications of AI where a lot of money could be made or lost are ones that are pretty mission critical. So, for example, military applications, medical applications, things about law, actually deciding, who's guilty or who could give out bail to. A lot of these decisions are ones where it would be very appreciated to understand the systems, right? So it seems like something that people are starting to ask for in different ways. So yeah, I guess my assumption would be that there would be a lot of money that would be interested in more introspectable systems and in ones that would correspondingly have a lot of decomposition.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think the I've still seen like relatively little work on this,
Yeah.
even though there are these good arguments for it. And certainly people in machine learning and other fields will say, yes, transparency is super important. And yes, we need systems to be explainable and so on. So yeah, I think I haven't seen that much work that is similar to Ort's, although there definitely is some. And I definitely agree that there's an appreciation for this. So yeah, I think partly, one question would be, if your aim is ultimately dealing with AGI risk and alignment, does that lead you to explore different kinds of approaches today to transparency and introspectability, right? So in particular, like if you're in that situation of being concerned about X risk, then you're going to be pretty focused on very scalable approaches to transparency. So approaches that are going to work as AI gets better and better. Whereas if you just want a system that is like transparent for a practical application today, like maybe it's okay to have something where like Humans just very carefully analyze the system and they work out like what kind of rules it's using in a way that's like, okay, now when the rules are relatively simple and like humans can understand them, but over time become more intractable.
Man, I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to think. I appreciate that there's a dichotomy there. I think one trap or one thing that I'm not totally sold on is the idea that like only extras people would care about that former part. Like if I were in charge of the military or close to the military, I'd really hope that they would be focusing on where AI is going. So it may be that it's just like a huge mistake from them not to be caring about this stuff that much.
Yeah, I think
I guess in
the
medicine, there's not as much coordination. So maybe there's not. In medicine, I'd also be very interested. I'd assume that surgeons and like doctors would really, it would be like a lot of financial value at stake and like having better systems over there that will scale over time.
yeah, I think maybe some of these things do intersect with timelines for dangerous AI, and so yeah, it does seem likely that the more decades sort of go by where AI is becoming more and more important in the economy, the more that various kind of research programs could contribute to transparency, would be explored in detail by different subfields, different practical applications. It seems, yeah, I think at the moment, like efforts in that direction seem pretty small, compared to just
Yeah.
efforts to make AI more useful without necessarily being more transparent. And I guess yeah, uh, it will sort of remain to be seen like whether that investment is sort of from the perspective of the future of, from the perspective of hindsight, like too little investment was made, or whether no, it's actually reasonable because we only really need these more transparent systems sometime in the future.
On decomposition, yeah, so on integrations with existing software, I think you pointed out that there could be some neat options over there. So I just want to get your take.
Yeah, so this is the idea of how could large language models, the ChatGPT style models, integrate or augment existing software. And I think you can already do a very basic experiment with this, where if you just ask these models, I don't know, how do I set up a filter on Gmail? Then they can, I think in general, do an okay job of, giving you the steps that you would need. They might be a little bit out of date, but it still might be like reasonably good advice. And they could probably explain a bit how some of the things work in these different software packages. So I think the general idea here is we have lots of very powerful software. So things like Photoshop and Excel and like Gmail just have huge numbers of features. And most people are only using a small fraction of the capabilities of these pieces of software. And then there's lots of software that's maybe just difficult to use. So people aren't using it because it's just has too much of a learning curve. And the idea is that the language models already could do an okay job of basically helping you, like holding your hand when you use that software. And this is without even being integrated into the software itself at all. So if, say, Adobe gets together with OpenAI to like do extensive integration, so they use like a ChatGPT style model, but they've like fine-tuned in the latest information about how the software works, and then just like tweak that. So probably Microsoft will do this for Office, given their partnership with OpenAI, and maybe Google will add this to their software. So the idea is like you would basically just prompt the system, and either it could tell you, you tell the piece of software what you want in natural language, and then either it would basically do the thing for you without telling you the steps it's doing, or it could just say, okay, here's the first step you would take. You click on this. Maybe it gives you like a set of options depending on how exactly you want it done. So I think, yeah, this would be a bit like you sit down with an expert user of the software and you tell them like what you want, and then they would kind of walk you through how to actually do it. So yeah, I think this could be, it's always very hard to judge like how useful this kind of thing will be. I think it will probably like have some use, just as the internet and YouTube have made a big difference, I think, to how people use like sophisticated pieces of software.
So I guess if I were to imagine it, yeah, I've been seeing some demos of things in this vein, but I guess in the future when I use my computer, it could just be like, you say open up this image in Photoshop, it just opens. And then you say, crop out this person, make them look better, make them look much better, put them in this other image, find an image of a forest and have them be in that. And hypothetically, the whole thing is you just like conversing, either talking or typing to your machine, similar in Word or Excel.
Yeah, that's right. And when it comes to images, you can also just have another model that's not a language model generate the image.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that give you like another, really sort of expand your action space, and it can be, give you a rich set of possibilities. But I think even in software that's basically all sort of text-based, I think there is some challenge which some companies are working on, which is if you want to make this pretty general, then people are working with this graphical user interface, and the language models, don't take in graphics. And so you have a choice there of like either basically getting rid of the graphics and just having some textual representation that the model works with, or having a model that takes in both text and images. So yeah, so I think like really getting this to be like very refined will probably take a bit of time. But yeah, I can imagine it won't be that long. Like the language models, I think, already have a decent understanding at some level of like how the software works.
I mean, there's a huge topic. I haven't thought about it like a gigantic deal, in part because it feels like a lot of other people are like very active in the area. I think my impression is that almost everyone smart trying to make a lot of money now in tech is like jumping into language models. That's a dramatic overstatement, but at least a lot of the crypto people have been like jumping into language models, and it just seems like it'll be a very busy area. One aspect that I'm a bit curious about is it does seem like there's a big question of like what the main impacts are going to be. If one of the dominant impacts of language models is to like improve software, would the benefit of that basically be that web software is, twice as good, right? And in that case, the economic benefit is more questionable. Like the economic benefit of all of the internet, I think, has been like surprisingly small. There's other papers on that. So yeah, one big question is like, what are the key aspects here that may make a very large economic difference or may change the world in like a surprising way?
Yeah, these seem like really difficult questions, and I don't have
Of course.
uh, a very worked out view. So take everything with a big grain of salt. So yeah, I think the if you look at sort of, okay, language models are this very impressive technology. They're sort of dazzling people who say use them for the first time. And then we say, okay, in terms of economically important tasks, what do they change? What can they have an impact on? And for the moment, it seems like, I don't know, if we take energy, do they are they going to, in the next few months, like dramatically reduce cost of energy? And it seems like, no, that would be, really difficult. You maybe need like breakthroughs in, I don't know, nuclear fusion or something, and most of the breakthroughs you need most breakthroughs in energy to have a big impact on the economy, you'd have to build a lot of infrastructure. And these models, they definitely have, at the moment, very limited interface to the physical world. So yeah, so it's much easier for them to say, help people write software or like help people get information more quickly than like trawling through Google or something, or like trawling through a library, than it is for them to like, yeah, I don't know, build a big power plant or something like that. So yeah, I think the people are making lots of analogies. You can say, okay, what kind of things a language model's like, or this whole family of AI systems like. And I guess, they can make it easier to write software. So then you can think of sort of various other technologies that make it easier to write software, like GitHub and things like that, or just like open source projects supported by the web. They make it easier to get information about things. So sort of like Wikipedia and Google search.
On programming assistants, I think Copilot obviously seems very promising. One challenge of programming is that there are just so many skills that you have to know in order to be good at it, and there are so many aspects of it. So one key question that I'm curious about, there's probably some better way of formalizing it, is like how hungry is programming for better work? So it could, programming has advanced a whole lot in the last 50 years, but at the same time, like people have just gotten hungry, like they've just demanded more and more, so fancier interfaces. So it would be very depressing, but I could totally imagine if we got like another 2 orders of magnitude of a performance gain, that would basically go to making prettier UIs, but we still need like the same number of programmers for a very similar amount of backend functionality. So it's really not clear how programmer productivity, what the curve is between that and something like number of programmers employed or the total value of the software. Right? My guess is that it'll have to be AGI complete to like totally be like a complete delta. If it just gives us like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, which is still like a huge amount, it's just like really hard to know how valuable that is. But I'd also flag here that we seem to be very programming starved. Like programming salaries are still very high, and there are a bunch of programmers. My guess is that there's like a very strong need for much more software if people could do it. People complain all the time about like bugs and stuff in Google and, just mediocre software quality in even the best companies. So for the big companies to be able to have like consistently high quality performance software across the stack while upgrading the stack to more demanding applications and then replicating that like super high quality, well written software for like everything else as well. And that just seems like 3 to 7 orders of magnitude higher than what we are now. There is, of course, a big question of like maybe specific aspects will be automated much more than others. So maybe some aspects of programming will be like phenomenal, and then that will lead to some things that we weren't expecting. Obviously, if it could totally be the case that maybe there are some clusters that if we try to automate the way that we do programming now, we could only get like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more. But if we're able to come up with other types of programming that are much more amenable to AI systems,
Mhm.
then we could do a whole lot better. But it's not
Yeah,
super
but then
clear to me.
humans might need to understand those enough to be able
Yeah,
to like get AIs to do them. So
this is a question. There's also like one example of something that may be a bit more flexible that I've liked is the idea of, pairing ChatGPT and other language models with programming. So you could imagine something where you ask a language model to do something, and then it writes like 4 small programs and uses those to help it with answer, right? And things like that may be able to be like a very powerful like extension that could be like run dynamically instead of programming working the existing way that it's been doing with humans.
yeah, so sorry, that's like instead of instead of getting ChatGPT to help us write a program and then we run it ourselves, you're saying you just get ChatGPT to
Well, I mean, like
yeah,
the model that we have now
yeah,
is that programmers write, you know, they write code and then that code goes through version control.
yeah.
And after a few different steps, it gets published.
Mhm.
The way that ChatGPT works is that you just ask it for something and it gives you an answer right then and there.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm saying that in the latter model, I'd be curious if it could produce even better answers by writing code on demand. So, for example, like maybe you ask it to do a Fermi estimate, and as part of the Fermi estimate, it writes a small Python script and then uses that Python script to generate
Yeah.
one of those steps. It's kind of like a decompositional
So I
thing.
think that's very
Yeah.
likely that
Yeah.
this will like people will be doing that in the next year.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's I guess yeah, basically these ChatGPT style models aren't that good at size calculations.
Yeah.
And so if they can, they'll often be better placed if they can offload that to the Python interpreter. But they are quite good at writing, a bit like humans, they're quite good at writing the program that would compute the thing that they want to compute.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big advantage for us if we have models do that because the Python program is this, precise artifact. And in some ways, it's just going to be easier. It's easier for us to check that it's done exactly the right thing than if it gave you like a description in natural language, which is sort of vague and maybe has like notation that you don't necessarily understand or know, where it's got the notation from. So yeah, so I think that will be a common thing, and probably people will make much better integration where they'll like train the model to use the Python interpreter, whereas currently the
Yeah.
model is just like trained to write the programs, but not to actually use the interpreter.
But this does come back a little bit to decomposition.
Hmm.
I know Ots thought a little bit about things like this. In their decompositions, were there steps of like writing code? And like, have you slash them thought about what I could imagine steps of this that would look, 3 steps, right? Like ChatGPT to code to more ChatGPT. But have you thought much about what like 5 to 15 steps would look like?
Yeah. So there's definitely people thinking about these kind of things. I think some from just a capabilities like, let's do these cool AI things and like achieve more, capability by chaining together language models and yeah, traditional code. So yeah, I think there's definitely like a lot that could be done there. I think off the top of my head, I'm not sure like what the best examples are. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, yeah. So some other applications I've been playing with. Yeah, sorry. So recently, I guess like around decision automation, I think that this plays into. I've been experimenting with a personal assistant recently, and I found that there's just like a whole lot of annoying cruft that I think every human has to deal with, right?
So
So
sorry, this is a real personal
yeah,
assistant,
there's
like
a
a
real
flesh and blood
yeah,
sort of.
real personal
Yeah.
assistant,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
But so this person has been helping with a business, but also like they've been helping a little bit with some personal
Mhm.
things. And I think in each case, it's like really nice in this case to like make a Notion workflow for each one. So you want like a Notion, or you want your own like little wiki.
Mhm.
So in this case, for business, there's like a whole bunch of things that are kind of standardized. For personal issues, it's just like a little finance wiki, or like if you have medical issues, it's great to be able to organize them in like a little medical wiki. Yeah, and then a lot of my decisions come from like just looking through the wiki and then connecting that to something in the real world. I am kind of surprised that there aren't better like real personal assistant services that do this at scale. So for example, with medical issues, I know some groups kind of claim that they do, but not many will actually like help organize all your files for you. But that is something like my guess is that a lot of that is just about economies of scale now. I know that virtual assistants, of course, were touted a lot in the 4-hour work week, but I think they haven't scaled as well as people were hoping, in
Mhm.
part because it's just very hard to get like the quality to like the ratio right. There just aren't that many people who are very good at being a personal assistant for the numbers that people are willing to pay. But of course, when combined with AI, that becomes a lot more possible. So my guess is that I don't know. I'm really curious if like how much of it is going to be like 100% AI. Like it would seem a lot easier to me to imagine like 95% AI and like 5% human. So we just have like very good personal assistant type services that are like just heavily automated that are doing most things for most people. And that seems like a vision that is kind of straightforward and also like hypothetically not too hard to achieve.
Yeah. So I think the current generation of models, like without any additional bells and whistles, so just with the Chat GPT type interface, you can just talk to that model, say about health issues or legal issues or sort of how to structure your finances. And and I think right now, like yeah, I think like in the next year you'll get like pretty reasonable responses from these models. Not better than the best human experts, but maybe like still pretty helpful for a lot of people. But yeah, that doesn't so that system, like every time you ask it a question, you'll have to give it all the context about yourself.
Yeah.
So yeah, in order to have a personal assistant, right, you want a system that like has all your information basically and is able to access that in order to make decisions or like be helpful or give advice and so on. And I think, yeah, currently that information is sort of stored in like heterogeneous ways, right? This is related to the problem of, say, medical records being so intractable. So, and generally, like maybe people have medical information on their phone and that's not integrated with their health records. So, yeah, I guess it's possible that you could just have a big pile of documents and then the AI system like reads all the documents and then produces like some summary, which is what it actually uses then in a prompt. And that would be like a big improvement on maybe that would just make this whole thing a lot easier. This system would be pretty good. But yeah, I think that would be, there's definitely going to be a challenge with language models of, there's all this information that we want them to be able to use. So if it was a model that is helping us personally, or if you're a big company and you've got all this internal information, which is not on the internet, so it's not trained into the model, and it's changing fast, and it's in databases, like emails, like Word documents, and so on, you have some task of like how you get this to the model. But yeah, I think this definitely seems like further away than some of the sort of more obvious uses models. But yeah, definitely seems like an interesting use case.
Just trying to think through that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So just for my medical issues,
Yeah.
I've been impressed by when I go to a doctor.
Mhm.
Often they ask me to list all my information from scratch.
Yeah.
It's not like they're asking for like a complex Notion workflow. A lot of them don't expect that from patients, which is kind of insane. The medical system is super broken. So it seems to me like hypothetically, if you were just able to combine a lot of the information into one like huge Google Doc, right? Like a 20 pages of text, and then summarize that as needed into one page of text, that would still give you 80% of the benefit. And I imagine you could do that with steps with like GPT-3, basically. Like a lot of the getting information to the right place is like the information right now is just in PDFs and emails. So it's like a lot of annoying steps, but it's not too hard to like put it into one big page. And then
Yeah. So just right.
yeah.
If you just got information, and so if you're not doing inference or deductions from it,
Yeah.
you're basically just collating information that's in different formats,
Yeah.
different document types from different hospitals or health providers, and you just put it into one condensed format. Yeah, I mean, that seems like this is related to the kind of thing Elicit is doing. U.com, the search engine, is doing some kind of integration of language models and semantic stuff. So yeah, this seems like, plausible application. It's going to be like really important and valuable for the models to understand, right, what is in the medical documents. I think and I think they already would understand some of this. There might be like subtleties of how the PDF is formatted or something that would tell like a human doctor something about like where this came from. But because, there's still going to be ambiguity in all these things, right? Like the abbreviations are used in a medical context, and if the language model didn't understand the abbreviation, then it might, make mistakes based on that. So so it's one of these applications where sort of smarter models will be more useful and reliable doing this. But I think it's definitely the case that, some of the weaknesses of sort of information collection in the medical system are not due to like lack of software or like, lack of our overall sort of level of software progress, but also are about there's like privacy issues, there's sort of lack of investment in software among these companies, or among the medical organizations, that like hospitals maybe just aren't investing that much in software. So I'm not sure like how much I think there'll be like various attempts to do this, but that in the medical domain, but some things, I think probably also just tends to be quite conservative in certain ways with technology, because getting approval for things and like, I don't know, there's like very high cost of error in terms of at least, perception of error.
And on the individual side, I could say that, so I've worked in one medical company and they definitely had a lot of privacy issues to deal with, but individuals don't have to deal with that many privacy issues themselves, really. Unless, like, it depends on how worried you are. A lot of getting the right information is just sending emails to the right people and pinging them. Maybe it would be kind of dystopic if, a GPT-4 was doing that, right? If we just have like set off some chatbots loose on like trying to track down all the medical professionals that you've worked with. And then, like,
I mean, doing it for yourself is one thing, but I suppose if you wanted to build a system that like build a piece of software that will reliably do this, and then me as a like random user, it's like, okay, this system apparently works it just puts together all your medical information in a really convenient way. Yeah, for that you'd probably have to have like access to this data, be able to validate it. It seems like it would be a more like a more difficult project. So, but yeah, I think that it would, in many cases it would be nice to be able to, if you're having a conversation with a doctor or a lawyer, for example, who you're consulting with, if there was like a Google Doc or yeah, or a Notion document, just some store of information that you were both looking at, contributing to. You have common knowledge if you're both looking at the same information, and I think that would often be like very helpful rather than just the like face to face where you don't know what the context is that you're both seeing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so it's about 8 p.m. Are there any final things that you want to talk about?
Yeah, let's. I think I'm good with closing there.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for joining.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it was really fun.